They forced her to work until she broke, until the Alpha King saw her scars and chose her. The bread was burning. Nara could smell it from the top of the stairs, that sharp, dark edge of something crossing the line between done and ruined, and she was already moving before the thought fully formed in her mind. Her feet hit the cold stone floor of the kitchen. At the same moment the smoke began to curl upward from the oven, thin and gray and accusatory. She pulled the tray out with bare hands. Not because she forgot the cloth. She knew exactly where the cloth was. It was folded on the hook beside the window, exactly where she had put it the night before. She grabbed the tray without it, because there was no time, because burned bread meant wasted bread, and wasted bread in this house meant Nara would not eat that day. Simple as that. Simple as the two bright burns that rose on her palms as she dropped the tray onto the stone counter and pressed both hands flat against the cold surface to kill the pain before it could spread into her face and betray her. The rest of the house was still sleeping. This was the only time of day that belonged to her, these 40 minutes between the moment she woke and the moment the first footstep hit the floor upstairs. 40 minutes to start the bread, light the fire in the main hall, bring in the wood from the yard, and have the kettle hot before her aunt came downstairs with that particular expression she wore in the mornings, the one that meant she had already found a reason to be disappointed. Nara did not think about the burns on her hands. She thought about the bread. She turned the tray over, checked the underside, darker than she liked, but not black, edible. She set it to cool on the rack, started another batch by feel, her hands moving through the steps without her needing to direct them. She had made this bread so many times that her body remembered it the way her body remembered how to breathe: flour, water, salt, the small piece of starter that she kept alive in a jar at the back of the cold shelf because no one else in this house knew it existed. Outside, the sky was the color of old iron. The Brentwood Pack territory sat in a wide valley between two hills, and in the winter the sun did not clear the eastern ridge until nearly 8. For the first 3 hours of every day, the world outside was dark and blue-gray, and very quiet. Nara had once loved that quiet. When she was a child, she used to get up early on purpose just to sit in it. Her mother would find her at the kitchen table with a cup of warm milk, watching the darkness through the window like it was something worth watching. Her mother had called her a little owl. Her mother had been dead for 5 years. Nara pressed her hands flat against the counter again, not because they hurt, but because the memory had teeth, and pressing her palms against cold stone was something to do that was not crying. She had gotten very good at finding things to do that were not crying. There were always things to do. That was the one reliable fact about her life in this house. She heard the footstep before she heard the voice. One heavy step on the 3rd stair from the top. That was always the first warning. Her aunt, Celeste, was not a light woman, not in body and not in mood. And she moved through the house the way weather moved through a valley. You felt her coming before she arrived. Nara checked the bread, straightened the counter, moved the kettle over the hottest part of the fire. The kitchen door opened. Celeste stood in the doorway in her dark morning robe, her gray-streaked hair loose around her shoulders, her eyes already doing that slow sweep of the room that Nara had learned to read the way some people read maps. The sweep meant assessment. It meant the counting of things that could be criticized. The sweep landed on the bread rack. "Those look dark," Celeste said. "The oven ran hot," Nara said. "The inside is fine." Celeste walked to the rack and pressed one finger into the top of a loaf. This was something she did every morning. Nara had never figured out what information this was supposed to deliver. The bread was always fine. She made the same bread in the same way, at the same time, every day. The pressing of the finger was not about the bread. "My daughter has a meeting with Elder Groves this morning," Celeste said, withdrawing her finger. "She will need her hair arranged before she goes. You will do it after breakfast." "I have the linens to finish," Nara said. "The linens will wait." The linens would not wait. If the linens were not done before midday, Elder Groves himself would notice, because Elder Groves made a point of visiting the house on linen-changing days to inspect the guest rooms, a habit so old and so pointless that no one questioned it anymore. But Nara did not say this. She had learned, a long time ago, that explaining things to Celeste cost more than it saved. "Yes, Aunt," she said. Celeste poured herself a cup of the tea that Nara had already steeped and left waiting in the pot. She did not say thank you. She had not said thank you in 5 years. In the first weeks after Nara's parents died and Nara came to live in this house, Celeste had occasionally said thank you, but those thank yous had the particular quality of something being performed for an audience that had since left the room. Once there was no audience, the thank yous stopped. The pack elder had visited 3 times in those first months, checking on Nara, making sure she was settling in, making sure Celeste was providing what she had promised to provide. Those visits had been warm and formal, and Celeste had been warm and formal in return, and Nara had sat at the table in her best dress and answered questions in quiet, careful sentences. The visits stopped after the 3rd one. The elder was a busy man. He had a whole pack to run. He had taken Celeste at her word, which was what you did with people who looked reliable, and Celeste was very good at looking reliable. Nara pulled on her apron and went to start the eggs. Behind her, Celeste sat down at the head of the table, which had been Nara's father's table, in her father's chair, and opened the pack newsletter that she read every morning cover to cover, and the sound of the pages turning was so ordinary and so domestic that it was almost possible to forget that everything about this moment was wrong. Almost. By the time the house was fully awake, Nara had already been working for 4 hours. Celeste's 2 daughters, Petra and Louisa, came downstairs at 7, with the easy energy of girls who had slept well and expected to keep sleeping well indefinitely. They were not cruel in the way that people in stories were cruel. They did not sneer or mock. They simply did not see Nara the way you saw furniture, not with contempt, just with the casual blindness of people for whom another person's labor was background noise. Petra sat down at the table and started talking to her mother about the meeting with Elder Groves. She wanted a new dress for it. She wanted the blue one that the seamstress in town had been working on for 2 weeks, but it was not finished yet, and this was apparently Nara's fault in some way that Petra explained at length, while Nara stood at the counter and sliced the dark bread into even pieces and arranged them on the serving plate. Louisa, the younger one, at least looked at Nara when she spoke to her. "Could you press my gray skirt?" she said. "The one with the buttons." "After the linens," Nara said. "Mother said you were doing my sister's hair this morning." "After the linens," Nara said again. Louisa blinked, then looked at her mother, then looked back at Nara, and then simply went back to her breakfast, because the math of Nara's morning was not something Louisa had ever needed to do, and she was not about to start now. Nara ate standing at the counter, 3 bites of bread and a cup of tea, while the family ate their full breakfast at the table. This was not a rule that had been stated. It was a rule that had arrived through accumulation, through the slow settling of 100 small moments into a single understood shape. Nara ate standing up. Nara ate last. Nara ate whatever was left. She had long since stopped being hungry in the way that expected to be satisfied. The linens took 2 hours. Nara stripped the 4 guest beds, carried the sheets to the washing room, worked the water through them by hand in the stone trough because the pack's washing machine was reserved for family clothing, hung them on the lines strung across the yard in the winter cold with her fingers going numb by the 3rd sheet, and then went inside to begin Petra's hair. Petra sat in front of the mirror in her room and told Nara how she wanted it. Nara listened, did the hair, said nothing unnecessary, left the room when she was finished, and Petra did not turn around. The bruise on Nara's left side, from where she had caught the corner of the washing trough when she was lifting the last sheet, was already deepening from red to purple. She had not mentioned it. There was no one to mention it to, and mentioning it would not have changed anything. She went back to work. The pack had a structure, like all packs did. At the top was Elder Groves, a man in his 60s with white hair and a careful, measured way of speaking that people often mistook for wisdom. Below him were the ranked families, the ones with land and standing, and the right to sit in the meeting hall at the front. Below them were the working families, the ones who ran the shops and the farms and kept the territory moving. At the bottom, not on the official list but understood by everyone, were the people who had lost their standing through death or debt or bad luck. Nara was at the bottom. She had not always been. Her father had been a mid-rank wolf, respected, steady, the kind of man that other men came to when they needed a problem solved without drama. Her mother had been a healer's daughter, trained in the old plant knowledge, the kind of woman who remembered every face she had ever met, and every name that went with it. They had owned their house outright, which was why Celeste had moved into it so quickly after the accident. The house went to the next of kin. Celeste was the next of kin. Nara was 17 and could not contest it. The pack elder had explained this to her, at the time, in a very gentle voice that made it clear. He found the situation unfortunate, but not unusual. There were rules, he said. The rules existed for a reason. Nara had nodded and said she understood, and gone home with her aunt. She had cried for 3 days in the small room at the back of the house that used to be a storage room and was now her bedroom. Then she stopped crying and started working, and had not really stopped working since. 5 years was long enough to understand what your life had become. It was also long enough to stop expecting it to change on its own. That afternoon, while Nara was carrying the second load of firewood in from the yard, she saw her mother's ring on Petra's hand. It was not the first time she had seen it. Petra had been wearing it for 2 years. Nara had long since moved past the sharp, breathless shock of that first sighting, and arrived somewhere much quieter and much more dangerous, which was simple, flat recognition of what it meant. She set the wood down by the fireplace. She stacked it neatly, because neatly was the only way she knew how to do things now. And then she went back outside for the third load, and she did not look at Petra's hand again. But she felt it. That was the thing about grief that nobody told you. It did not get smaller with time. You just got larger around it. You built more room in yourself to carry it, and that meant you were always, in some quiet corner of yourself, carrying it, even when you were stacking firewood, even when you were slicing bread, even when you were looking at a girl who was wearing your dead mother's ring like it was nothing at all. The sky outside had gone the color of pewter by 4 in the afternoon. The temperature was dropping. Nara could feel it in the burns on her palms, which she had not bandaged because there was no time to bandage them, and because showing up with bandaged hands in this house meant answering questions. She went back inside. Started dinner. It was close to midnight when the house finally went quiet. Nara sat on the edge of her cot and took off her shoes, and looked at the small strip of dark sky, visible through the high window of her room. The window was too high to see anything through from a standing position. You had to sit on the cot, which was the only furniture in the room besides a narrow shelf, to see the sky. She had spent a lot of time in the past 5 years looking at that strip of sky. Tonight there was 1 star visible, maybe 2. Her hands hurt. Her left side hurt. She was hungry in the dim, distant way that did not feel urgent anymore, just permanent. She had eaten 3 bites of bread and a bowl of soup that she had made from the pot bones that were left after dinner, which was the soup she made for herself every night, which was not the soup the family had eaten, which had been the good one, with the vegetables and the cream. She did not think about the soup. She thought about the star. She thought about how her father used to know the names of the stars, all of them, not just the famous ones, and how he had tried to teach her, and she had not learned them fast enough, and now she would never learn them from him. She thought about how her mother's hands had been shaped like her own hands, same narrow knuckles, same long fingers, and how strange it was to carry a dead person inside your own body that way. She thought about a lot of things in those last minutes before sleep, in the room that was too cold in winter, and too hot in summer, with the star outside, and the ache in her palms, and the bruise along her ribs. Then she stopped thinking and closed her eyes. Tomorrow the bread needed to be started at 5. Tomorrow the linens from today needed to be brought in from the line, folded, and put back on the beds before Elder Groves arrived. Tomorrow Louisa wanted her gray skirt pressed. Tomorrow was already full. The star outside the window did not care about any of that, which was the only thing Nara really liked about it. She slept. And in her sleep she was running through the forest the way she used to run when she was a girl, before everything, her wolf body low and fast and belonging to no one, and the trees opened up ahead of her like they were glad she was coming, and the dark was not dark at all, but full of silver, and she was not hungry or tired or small. She was just herself, running. And the stars above the trees knew all their own names, and so did she. The morning she turned 22, nobody remembered. That was not a surprise. Nara had stopped expecting her birthday to be remembered in this house after the 2nd year, when she had woken up and quietly waited through the whole day to see if anyone would say anything, and no one had. Not Celeste, not Petra, not Louisa, who was the softest of the 3, and sometimes looked at Nara with something that was almost guilt. None of them. After that, Nara stopped marking the day herself. There was no use in marking it if you were the only one who knew it was marked. But her body knew. It always knew, in some way she couldn't explain, like a bell ringing in a room you could not enter. She woke on her birthday with a particular kind of weight in her chest, heavier than the usual weight, like the year stacking itself on top of all the other years and asking her to account for them. 22. She pulled on her clothes in the dark and went downstairs to start the bread. The kitchen was cold. It was always cold in the mornings at this time of year, a deep, settled cold that lived in the stone of the floor and the stone of the walls, and took all morning to fully leave. Nara had learned to work quickly in it, to let the movement of her body generate its own warmth, to stop waiting for the room to warm before she began. She lit the fire. She filled the kettle. She took the starter from the cold shelf, the little jar of something alive that she had been feeding and tending for 5 years, and she began the bread. The burns from the week before had healed into shiny pink lines across both palms. They did not hurt anymore, unless she gripped something too tightly. She had learned to adjust her grip. Outside, the valley was still dark. Celeste came down at 6:30 instead of 7, which was already a sign that the day intended to be difficult. "Elder Groves is coming for dinner," she said, before she had even poured her tea. "Not just a visit. Dinner. He is bringing 2 of the boundary committee with him. I need the house right by noon." Nara looked at the list in her head, the list that was always running, always updating, the inventory of what needed to be done, and how long each thing took, and what order they had to happen in. She ran the calculation. "I'll need help with the windows," she said. "Petra will help." Petra would not help, and they both knew it. But Celeste needed to believe she had said the right thing, so Nara let her believe it. "Yes, Aunt," she said. By 8, Petra had gone to visit a friend across the territory, and Louisa was busy with her own reading by the fire, and Nara was on a wooden stool reaching up to clean the high windows in the main hall with a cloth and a bucket of cold water, because the hot water was reserved for washing the dishes that were about to be brought out for the dinner settings. The stool wobbled. It had always wobbled. Nara had long since learned to compensate with her body weight, shifting slightly when she felt the rocking start, keeping her balance through something that was more instinct than thought. From up here she could see more of the yard than usual. The winter bare trees along the fence, the path that led to the gate and then to the main road through the territory, 2 pack children running in the lane, chasing each other, breathless and laughing. She watched them for a moment. Then she went back to the window. The thing about 5 years was that it changed your body in ways you did not notice until you caught yourself doing something and realized your body had learned it without asking your permission. Nara's hands had become hands that worked. The palms were tougher than they used to be. Her shoulders were broader. There were calluses in places that had not had calluses before. She had developed the habit of walking close to walls, not because she was afraid, but because 5 years of navigating a house full of people who moved through it like they owned it, which they did, she was very clear on that, had taught her to use the edges. She was not a fragile person. She had never been fragile, even before. Her mother had said once, when Nara was 12 and had fallen out of a tree and come home with a scraped arm and a bright expression, that Nara had bones that knew how to take a hit. The bones still knew. But there were limits to what bones could take. The limit she was approaching, without fully knowing she was approaching it, had something to do with the specific weight of one more day of the same thing. Not a dramatic limit, not a cliff edge, more like water wearing away stone, slow, steady, and eventually you looked down and the stone was gone. Elder Groves arrived at 6 with the 2 boundary committee members, who were both men in their 40s, with the kind of faces that had settled into permanent authority, the way old furniture settled into its shape. Nara had seen them at pack meetings before. They were not bad men. They were men who had not been asked to see Nara, and so they had not seen her. Celeste welcomed them at the door. The house smelled of the roast that Nara had put on at noon, and tended through the afternoon, checking the temperature, turning the vegetables, making sure the gravy developed the way Celeste liked it, not too thick, not too thin, with the dark fond from the bottom of the pan worked in slowly. Nara served. She did this quietly and efficiently, appearing when things needed to appear, and disappearing when they didn't, which was the particular skill that 5 years of this life had made second nature. She was very good at being in a room without being in a room. Elder Grove said the roast was exceptional. Celeste smiled and accepted the compliment. Nara was in the kitchen by then, eating the bread heel and the bowl of broth she had set aside for herself, standing at the counter, listening to the murmur of conversation from the dining room. She heard her name once. Just once, in passing, Celeste saying something about how Nara helped with the house, and Elder Grove saying something warm and vague in response, and then the conversation moved on to the boundary dispute that the committee was there to discuss. Nara ate her bread heel. It was her birthday. She was 22 years old. She did not mark the occasion. What nobody in the house knew was that Nara had a small box under the loose floorboard beneath her cot. The box had been there since the first year. It was a simple wooden box, the kind that tea came in, and it contained the following: a folded piece of paper with her mother's handwriting on it, a recipe for the birthday cake her mother had made every year, one of her father's shirt buttons that she had found in the grass the week after the funeral, a dried flower from her mother's garden that had lost all its color but kept its shape, and a small amount of money. The money was the important thing. Nara had been putting money in the box for 4 years, not much at a time. Sometimes just a coin or two, from the small amounts that occasionally passed through her hands in the course of running the household, from change returned when she was sent to the market, from the single occasion when a pack member had pressed a coin into her palm for helping carry something and she had not given it back because she had decided, in that moment, that she was not going to. The total was not enough to go anywhere, not yet, but it was something. Having something was different from having nothing, even when the something was very small. The week before the summit notice arrived, Nara dropped a pot. It was not a significant pot. It was the medium stock pot, the one she used for soups, and it slipped from her hands when she was lifting it from the stove, because she had been awake since 4:30, and it was now past 11 at night, and her hands had simply stopped cooperating with her intentions. The pot hit the stone floor with a sound like a small explosion. The sound brought Celeste to the kitchen doorway inside of 30 seconds. Celeste could hear things going wrong in this house the way some animals could hear sounds outside the range of human hearing. It was one of her gifts. "What happened?" Celeste said. Not a question. "I dropped the pot," Nara said. Obviously. Celeste looked at the floor, then at Nara, with the expression that Nara had catalogued and filed under the category of particular disappointment. "This is the third thing this month." The third thing this month had been a cup that slipped and cracked, and a dish that Nara had set too close to the edge of the counter and that had fallen when Petra walked past, and the counter vibrated. Nara had not argued about the dish at the time. She was not going to argue about the pot now. "I'm sorry," she said. "Sorry doesn't fix pots," Celeste said, and went back to bed. Nara stood in the kitchen for a long moment after the door closed. Then she bent down and picked up the pot, which was not broken, which was one thing at least, and set it in the washing basin, and looked at her hands. They were shaking slightly. Not from fear. She had moved past fear a long time ago, and arrived at something on the other side of it, something that was closer to exhaustion in its bone-deep form, the kind that sleep did not touch because it had gone too far down. She steadied her hands. She finished the kitchen. She went to bed. But lying in the dark with the strip of sky outside her window showing no stars tonight, just cloud, she thought about the box under the floorboard, with a clarity and a focus that felt different from before. It was not enough yet. But she was going to make it enough. She was going to make it enough because the alternative was staying here until she was 30, and then 40, and then older than that, and she could not make herself believe in that future. She had tried to believe in it. She had held it up and examined it from every angle, the future in which she simply continued, and it had looked back at her with nothing in it. Number. She was going to go. She did not know where yet. She did not know when. But the decision itself, the simple act of making it and knowing she had made it, was the first thing in 5 years that had felt entirely her own. She held it quietly in the dark, like the jar of starter on the cold shelf, like something she was keeping alive on purpose. It was hers. 3 days later, the summit notice arrived. Nara found it on the hall table when she came in from the yard, still carrying the basket from the morning market run. It was a heavy cream envelope addressed to Celeste, which meant it was pack business, which meant Nara would hear about it secondhand when Celeste decided to tell her whatever she wanted her to know. She set it on the table and went to put the market things away. Celeste found the letter an hour later. Nara heard the sound of the envelope opening from 2 rooms away, and then the particular silence that followed, which was the silence of Celeste reading something and calculating. Then Celeste's voice, "Nara, come here." Nara dried her hands and went. Celeste was standing in the sitting room with the letter in her hands, and the expression she wore when something was happening that she intended to use to her advantage. "The Alpha King is coming," she said. "For the Interpack Summit. He will be hosted here in this territory for 4 days. There will be a delegation staying in the guest rooms." Nara said nothing. She waited. "The house will need to be completely prepared," Celeste said. "Every room. The guest linens, the silver. The kitchen will be running continuous meals for 4 days." "How many people in the delegation?" Nara asked. 8, perhaps 10. Nara ran the numbers. It was possible. Difficult, but possible. She would need to start 3 days before the summit to have everything ready. "I can do it," she said. Celeste folded the letter. "Of course you can," she said, in the tone she used when what she meant was that there was no possibility of Nara not doing it. Nara went back to the kitchen. She stood for a moment at the window, looking out at the yard. The Alpha King. She had heard stories about him, of course. Everyone in the Pack territories had heard stories. He was said to be young for the position, no more than 30, which was unusually young for an Alpha King. He was said to be very direct, which some people found alarming and others found refreshing. He was said to be fair in the way that sharp things were fair, which meant that his fairness had an edge. Nara had no particular feelings about any of this. She had bread to start, silver to polish, and guest rooms that needed to be turned from adequate to excellent before the most powerful man in the Pack world arrived at her aunt's front door. She pushed her sleeves up and began. She did not notice, in that moment, that the decision she had made 3 nights ago in the dark had just found its shape. She did not know yet that the Alpha King was going to see what no one in this house had bothered to look for. She just started polishing the silver, because that was the next thing, and there was always a next thing. Always. The first time Nara saw him, she thought she had done something wrong. That was not as strange as it sounded. In this house, over the last 5 years, the arrival of an important visitor had always meant more scrutiny, more pressure, and the near certain occurrence of some error that would be attributed to Nara, whether or not she had committed it. Her body had learned to brace itself when unfamiliar voices came through the front door. It had learned this the way animals learn things, without decision, through simple repetition. So when the door opened on the first morning of the summit, and Nara heard a voice that she had not heard before, low and direct, speaking to Celeste in the front hall, something in her spine straightened without her instructing it to. She was in the kitchen. She stayed in the kitchen. She had 8 things happening at once: the porridge, the bread already done and cooling on the rack, the tray of preserves that needed to be arranged, the kettle, the secondary kettle, the cream, the separate arrangement for any delegation member who did not take cream, and the timing of all of it, so that everything arrived at the table at the right temperature at the right moment. She focused on the 8 things. The voices in the hall continued for a few minutes. She heard Celeste using her public voice, which was smoother and slightly higher than her private voice, the voice she used when there was an audience worth performing for. She heard other voices, men and women, the sounds of luggage being moved, the clatter of people redistributing themselves through a house. Then the kitchen door opened. Nara did not turn around immediately. She was pouring the cream into the small pitcher and she was not going to rush it. "Is there coffee?" said a voice. She turned then. The man standing in the doorway was not doing anything remarkable. He was simply standing there, which was something everyone did all the time, and yet there was something about the way he occupied the space of the doorway that made the doorway seem like it had always been waiting for someone with exactly his proportions. He was tall, dark-haired, with the kind of face that had never been soft, not even when it was young, the bones of it too definite for softness. He was wearing a dark traveling coat that he had not yet removed, which meant he had come directly from wherever they had unloaded the horses, and walked through the house to the kitchen, rather than going to his room first. He was looking at her with dark eyes that were doing the same thing she was doing, which was assessing. "There will be in about 4 minutes," she said. He looked at the kettle, looked back at her. 4 minutes, he said. "The water needs to be off the full boil," she said, "or it turns the coffee bitter. 4 minutes after the boil, then pour. It takes a few minutes more after that." He was quiet for a moment. "Are you the cook?" he said. "I'm everything," she said, and turned back to the cream. She heard him move slightly, not leaving, just shifting his position, and then he said, "I'll wait," and she heard the sound of him setting something, probably his riding gloves, on the side table, that no one ever used near the kitchen door. She said nothing. She finished with the cream. She watched the kettle. When the sound of the boil softened, she began counting. He waited, apparently, because when she turned around with the coffee pot 4 minutes later, he was still there, leaning against the doorframe with the patience of someone who was accustomed to waiting for things that were worth waiting for. She poured the coffee. He took the cup. He did not say thank you immediately. He drank first, and then he said, "That's good." "I know," she said. Something shifted in his expression. Not a smile exactly. The territory just before a smile, where the face was considering the option. He went back to the hall. Nara stared at the kitchen door for exactly 3 seconds, which was all the time she could afford, and then she went back to her 8 things. His name was Caius Hartwell, and he was the Alpha King, which was a title that meant different things in different contexts, but which, in practice, meant that every pack leader in these territories answered to him, including Elder Groves, including everyone in Elder Groves's circle, which included Celeste, and which meant, in the simple arithmetic of power, that he was the most important person who had ever walked through the door of this house. Nara knew his name because Celeste had said it approximately 15 times in the 3 days leading up to his arrival, usually while assigning Nara a new task related to his visit. She knew his reputation because the pack had talked about almost nothing else for a week. He had taken the Alpha King position at 28, 3 years ago. His predecessor had been old and slow, and had let a number of boundary disputes calcify into something that was threatening to become actual conflict. Caius had come in and resolved 2 of them in his first month, not through war, which people had expected, but through a combination of direct negotiation and a very clear statement of what would happen if the negotiations failed. Nobody had tested what would happen. What people said about him, in the specific way that pack members talked about their leaders, which was always slightly amplified, but not entirely fictional, was that he saw things, that he had the particular quality, rare in leaders and rarer still in young ones, of noticing what other people chose not to notice. Nara did not think about this too much. She had a delegation of 10 people to feed 4 times a day, for 4 days. The summit began on the second morning with a formal meeting in the pack hall, which was 3 streets away, and which Celeste attended dressed in the blue coat that Nara had pressed that morning at 5:30 while the bread was rising. Petra and Louisa went too. All 3 of them left the house at 8:30 with the particular energy of people going somewhere they considered themselves entitled to be. The delegation members who were not attending the morning session remained at the house. 2 of them were working in the sitting room that Celeste had made available. One was in the garden, walking in circles in the winter morning, apparently this person's habit. And Caius. She did not know where Caius was until she came out of the laundry room and nearly walked directly into him in the back corridor. She stopped fast enough to avoid the collision. He stopped with slightly less urgency, which meant that he had seen her coming, and she had not seen him. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," she said. She was carrying a stack of clean linen, which she redistributed slightly in her arms to keep it balanced. He was not carrying anything. He was simply in the back corridor of this house, which was not a place that visiting dignitaries went. "I was looking for the kitchen," he said. "The kitchen is that way," she said, with a slight incline of her head toward the correct direction. "I came from that way," he said. "Then you passed it." He looked at her for a moment. "The corridor branches." "It does," she agreed. "Left at the branch is the laundry room, right is the kitchen." "I went left," he said. "That explains it." Another one of those almost smiles. He stepped aside to let her pass, which she did not expect, and because she did not expect it, she hesitated for a moment before moving, and in that moment, his eyes went briefly to her arms, to the sleeves that she wore long even indoors, and then back to her face, with an expression that she could not read and did not have time to interpret. She went past him with the linen. She heard him walk the other way, toward the kitchen. She did not think about the almost smile. She added the linen to the list of things she did not have time to think about, which was a long list and well organized. By the second afternoon, Nara had established the rhythm of the summit the way she established the rhythm of any large project, by identifying the fixed points and building everything else around them. Fixed point, the delegation ate together at 1, at 7, and wanted hot food available at 9 in the evening. Fixed point. Caius drank his coffee, the way she had made it the first morning. No cream, not sweet, and he came to get it himself, rather than sending someone. This was unusual. She noticed it. The third time he came to the kitchen himself, she was cleaning the preparation table and she said, without looking up, "I can bring it to wherever you're working." "I don't mind coming," he said. She looked up. He was looking around the kitchen, in the attentive way that some people had of looking at rooms, not just at the surfaces but at the layout, the function, the way things were arranged. "How long have you been running this kitchen?" he said. She considered the question. 5 years, she said. "By yourself?" "Mostly." He was quiet for a moment. "You cook for the family as well as the guests?" "The family, the guests, the pack members who come for meetings, and whatever Elder Groves brings with him when he visits, which is usually more people than he mentions in advance." Caius poured his own coffee. She let him, because fighting him over the pot would be more trouble than it was worth. "The elder visits often?" he said. "Regularly," she said. She went back to the table. "He and my aunt have a long-standing relationship." "Your aunt?" "Celeste Brent, the woman who welcomed you yesterday." Something in his face shifted. Not obviously. Nara only caught it because she had spent 5 years reading rooms for information, and she had gotten very good at catching the things that happened in faces in the moment before people decided what expression to wear. He drank his coffee. "Good coffee," he said, which was what he said every time, and left. Nara stood at the preparation table and stared at the door after it closed. Then she went back to work. On the third day, she noticed him watching. Not in an obvious way. Caius was not an obvious person. He was in the main sitting room when Celeste gave Nara the list of additional tasks for the evening meal, a list that extended well past what one person could reasonably accomplish before 7, and which Celeste delivered in the particular tone she used in front of guests, the one that sounded like friendly instruction, but meant something much more specific. Nara took the list, said yes to each item, and went. She did not look at him while this was happening. But when she came through the sitting room with the tray 20 minutes later, she felt his attention the way you felt a change in light, the difference between the room being generally lit and someone pointing something directly at a specific spot. She set the tray down. She arranged the things on the tray. She straightened the cloth at the edge of the table. She left. In the kitchen, she stood for a moment and breathed. Then she started on the next thing. That evening, after the family was in bed and the delegation members had retired to their rooms and the house had reached its particular midnight stillness, Nara was washing the last of the evening dishes when she heard a sound from the back corridor. Not a threat, just a sound. Footsteps, quiet and deliberate. She dried her hands and waited. Caius appeared in the kitchen doorway. He looked at her. He looked at the stack of dishes she was working through. He looked at the clock on the wall, which read 11:47. "Do you always work this late?" he said. "Yes," she said. "What time do you start?" She looked at him steadily. 4:30. He was quiet for a long time. "That's 17 hours, he said. "Some days it's 15, she said. "It depends on what's needed." He said nothing for a moment. He was doing the thing with his face again, the thing where she could tell he was thinking something that he had not decided to say yet. "Is there anything left to eat?" he said. She looked at him. That was not what he had been about to say, but it was what he chose to say. "There are bread rolls from this afternoon," she said, "and the rest of the soup. I'll take those, if they're available." She warmed the soup. She put 3 rolls on a plate. She set them on the table in the kitchen, because she was not going to carry them to the sitting room at 11:47 at night, and there was no reason to. He sat at the table. She went back to her dishes. They said nothing to each other, and yet the room was not silent in the way it usually was at this time of night, when silence meant simply the absence of demand. It was a different kind of quiet, the kind that had a shape to it. He finished the soup. He put the bowl and the plate near the basin, not because he had to, but because he apparently decided to. "Good night," he said. "Good night," she said. He left. Nara stood at the basin with her hands in the water, and let out a breath that she had not been aware of holding. Then she finished the dishes. She went to her room. She lay down on her cot. The strip of sky outside her window was very clear tonight. More stars than she had seen in weeks, all of them sharp and cold and steady. Something was shifting. She did not know what it was. She only knew that for the first time in a very long time, she had been in a room with someone who had noticed she was in it. Not for what she was doing, not for what she could provide. Just her. In the room. Present. She held that thought carefully, the way she held everything that belonged to her, with both hands, and no expectations. She closed her eyes. Tomorrow there were 3 more meals, and the silver to return to the cabinet, and the guest rooms to check before the delegation left, and after they left the house, would go back to being exactly what it had been before. But tonight she held the thought. For now. He found her by accident. Or that was how it appeared, which was not the same as saying that Caius Hartwell did anything by accident. It was the 3rd night of the summit. He had been in meetings for 11 hours, including a particularly difficult one, about the northern boundary dispute that had involved 3 pack leaders, 2 maps, and 1 moment where Elder Groves had said something that Caius had chosen to let pass without comment, filing it instead in the category of things worth returning to. He was not tired. He did not get tired the way most people meant the word. What he got, after long days of managing the specific weight of other people's calculations, was quiet. He needed a certain amount of quiet to reset, and he had not yet found it tonight. He had gone to get water from the kitchen. That was what he told himself. The storage room off the back corridor was open, which he noticed because its door was slightly ajar, and there was a faint light coming through the gap, the thin light of a single candle, not the kitchen's overhead lamp. He pushed the door open. Nara was sitting on a low stool in the corner of the storage room with a candle on the shelf beside her, her left hand resting on her knee, palm up. In her right hand, she held a strip of clean cloth. She was wrapping her left hand. Working slowly, methodically, the way someone worked when they had done a thing many times and no longer needed to think about the mechanics of it. She looked up when the door opened. She did not startle, which he noticed. People in pain startled. People who were used to being found doing things they had been forced to manage alone often did not startle. They just went still and waited. He pushed the door open fully and stepped in. "What happened to your hand?" he said. It was not quite a question. She looked at him for a moment, then at her hand. "I caught the edge of the shelf in the pantry," she said. "It's not serious." "Let me see." She looked at him with the same expression she had worn when he asked her how long she had been running the kitchen. That careful, measuring look, the one that was deciding how much to trust what it was seeing. She turned her palm up. He crossed the room and crouched down to be at her level, which was something he did not make a conscious decision to do, but simply did. He looked at her hand. The cut along the base of her palm was not deep, but it had bled enough, and had not been cleaned properly, which was the part that actually mattered. "When did this happen?" he said. "This afternoon," she said. "This afternoon," he repeated. "I finished the afternoon service first," she said, with no particular emphasis. He looked at her. She looked back at him. She was not ashamed. She was not apologetic. She was simply reporting what had happened, the way someone reported facts that they had long since stopped assigning meaning to. That was the thing that sat in his chest, and did not leave. He straightened. "There's a proper first aid kit in my travel bag," he said. "I'll get it. It doesn't need. I know it doesn't need it," he said. "I'm getting it anyway." He left the storage room, and walked quickly to his guest room, and came back with the leather kit that his travel aid packed, and repacked before every trip. He crouched down again. He cleaned the cut properly, with the proper solution, which made her breath catch once, and then still, and he applied the strip of proper dressing that actually stayed in place. She said nothing the whole time. When he was done, he sat back on his heels and looked at her. "Is that the only one?" he said. She understood what he was asking. He could see that she understood. Her face did not change, exactly, but something in it acknowledged the question. "No," she said. He waited. "My hands take most of it," she said. "Working hands do. It's not." She stopped. "It's not what?" he said. She looked at her newly bandaged palm. "People are going to see what they want to see," she said. "In this house, what I am is useful. That's not the worst thing to be." She said it with such flatness, such complete absence of self-pity, that it hit harder than tears would have. He said nothing for a moment. "How long has it been like this?" he said. 5 years, she said, and then, with a slight shift in her voice, "You asked me that already. About the kitchen." "I'm asking about something different now," he said. She was quiet. Outside the storage room, the house was completely still. The clock somewhere in the hall would be reading close to midnight. In the morning there would be the final day of the summit, the closing meeting, the departure of the delegation. He was aware of all of this. He was aware that he was crouching in a storage room in a pack house in the middle of the night, with a first aid kit open on the floor beside him, talking to a girl who had spent 5 years making herself invisible in a house that was not her own, and that nothing about any of this was standard. "My name is Nara," she said, which was not an answer to what he had asked, but was something else, something that he understood, meant she was offering something voluntary. "I know," he said. "I asked." She looked at him. "You asked about me?" "Yes." The candle on the shelf beside her shifted in a draft. Her face was half in shadow. "Why?" she said. It was a fair question. He thought about the version of the answer that was clean and uncomplicated, and he did not find one. "I notice things," he said. "It's part of what I do." "What did you notice?" He looked at her steadily. "The first night I was here," he said, "the dinner was exceptional. The house was run better than most of the formal houses I visit. The family was comfortable, the guests were comfortable, everything appeared and disappeared at the right time, and I watched everyone at that table take credit for it in small ways." He paused. "And you weren't at the table." She was very still. "You were in the kitchen," he said, "eating 3 bites of bread." She said nothing. He closed the first aid kit. He stood up. He looked down at her, still on the low stool, in the candlelight, in the storage room, at 11:53 at night. "I'm going to ask some questions tomorrow," he said, "about how this household is managed, about the pack records, about your parents." Something moved through her face at the word parents, fast and gone. "My aunt will not like that," she said. "No," he said. "She won't." He picked up the first aid kit. "Get some sleep, Nara," he said. She looked at him for a moment, with those measuring eyes. "Thank you," she said. "For the hand." "Yes," he said, and left the storage room. He walked back to his guest room in the quiet house, and sat on the edge of the bed in the dark for a while, not because he was tired, but because he needed a moment with what he knew. He had been in this territory for 3 days. He had attended the summit meetings, and discussed the boundary disputes, and managed the particular complicated dance of 14 different pack leaders, all wanting different things. He had done all of this, and he had also been watching a house. And what he had seen in the house was something that he had seen versions of before, in different territories, in different configurations, always recognizable once you knew what to look for. The pattern of one person's labor being absorbed into the comfort of others, without acknowledgement, without compensation, without anyone having to formally decide that this was what was happening, because it had arrived through degrees too small to object to individually. What he had also seen was a girl who had survived it without becoming bitter or broken, who made excellent coffee and ran a household better than most trained staff, who said yes to every task she was given, without losing the quiet, careful presence behind her eyes, that meant she was still fully there, still watching, still thinking, still, somewhere underneath the work and the fatigue and the 5 years, herself. He lay back on the bed. He was going to ask the questions tomorrow. He was going to make sure of some things. He did not fully understand yet what he intended to do about what he found, but he understood that the not asking was no longer an option he was willing to choose. He stared at the ceiling for a while. Then he slept. The questions started at breakfast. Not the obvious questions. Caius had not survived 3 years as Alpha King by making things obvious. He was deliberate, not blunt, and there was a significant difference. The difference was that blunt was about the person asking, and deliberate was about the information you needed. He asked Celeste, pleasantly, over the morning meal, how she had come to manage the Brent household, which he had heard was one of the most well-regarded in the territory. Celeste glowed. She explained. She had a lot to say on the subject. He listened. He asked follow-up questions. Celeste said my girls and my house approximately 14 times. She said my late brother-in-law's property once, quickly, in a way that she did not pause on, and he did not make her pause on it. He was noting things. His aide, a quiet and competent woman named Clara, was sitting 2 chairs down and was also noting things. After breakfast, while the closing meeting was being organized, Caius walked through the house with the specific, unhurried gait of someone who had every right to be wherever he was. He looked at the rooms. He looked at the photographs on the walls, which told him about who had lived in this house and when. He looked at the jewelry on Petra's hand when she passed through the hall. A simple ring, old, the kind of ring that a woman in her 30s would have received from someone who loved her. He looked at Nara, briefly, when she passed him in the corridor with the linen for the guest rooms, the last set before the departure. She caught his eye. He gave her nothing in his face, because giving her something in his face in this corridor could complicate things she did not need complicated. But he saw her. He saw her. The closing ceremony of the summit was at 3 in the afternoon, in the pack hall. All the pack leaders were present. Elder Groves spoke. Several others spoke. Caius spoke last, which was the standard order, and he said the things that needed to be said about the boundary agreements, and the cooperation between territories, and the way forward. And then, at the end of his remarks, he said, I will be reviewing the individual household records for the host families in this territory. As part of the standard post-summit assessment, my aide will be in contact with Elder Groves's office this week to request the relevant documents. This was not a standard post-summit practice. Everyone in the room knew it was not a standard post-summit practice. Celeste, in the 3rd row, went very still. Elder Groves smiled the smile of a man who had just heard something he was not sure about and was deciding how to feel. Caius finished his remarks. He stepped back. He shook hands with the people who came forward to shake his hand, and he did it with the particular warmth and efficiency that made each person feel attended to, while not taking more time than was necessary. He did not look at Celeste again. He did not need to. On the way back to the house, Clara walked beside him. The documents will show the property transfer from 5 years ago, she said quietly. Yes, he said. The girl has no formal standing in the household registry. No, he said. She's listed as a dependent, Clara said. Under Celeste Brent. He said nothing. Caius, Clara said. She was one of the few people who used his name without a title, which was one of the reasons he had hired her. What are you thinking? He was thinking about a storage room. He was thinking about a hand that had been bleeding since afternoon, and had not been wrapped until midnight, because there was no time. He was thinking about a girl who had said the worst thing to be was useless, as if useful was the best she was permitted to aim for. I'm thinking, he said, that we are going to ask some more questions. Clara walked beside him. And if the answers are what you expect, she said, then I'm going to do something about it, he said. She nodded. This was why she had worked for him for 3 years. He said what he meant, and then he did what he said. They walked back to the house in the winter afternoon. Inside, Nara was making the departure dinner. The bread was already done. The kitchen smelled of something warm and exact. He went upstairs. He sat at the small desk in his guest room and began writing a note to his legal officer. Outside, the sun was finally crossing the ridge and filling the valley with cold, flat winter light. It did not last long. It never did this time of year. But while it was there, it was complete. Below, in the kitchen, Nara heard the distant sound of a door opening and closing, and had no way of knowing that what had just begun was the most consequential movement of her entire life. She checked the bread. She adjusted the temperature. She moved on to the next thing, and then the next, and the kitchen was warm, and the work was real, and for now, that was all there was. For now. But not for much longer. She heard the sound of the door before she saw anyone fall. That was what she remembered afterward, the sound first, not the crash, but the low groan of the double doors at the back of the pack hall being pushed open by one of Elder Groves's staff, and then the particular silence that followed loud sounds, the kind that meant something had happened, that everyone was waiting to understand. Nara had been at the back of the hall. She was not supposed to be in the hall at all. She had come to deliver a last-minute addition to the refreshment table, a set of additional napkins that Celeste had decided were necessary approximately 10 minutes before the closing ceremony was scheduled to end. and Nara had carried them through the side entrance and set them on the table, and was in the process of leaving, when the doors opened, and everyone turned, and she turned too. A woman from the delegation, one of the ones she had served breakfast to, was helping Elder Groves's aide through the door. The aide looked pale. The aide sat down hard on the nearest chair, and put his head between his knees. Nothing happened for a moment. Then it happened to Nara. Not in a way that started with pain. That was the strange part, looking back. It started with the room tilting very slightly, as if the floor had decided to express an opinion about how level it was. She grabbed the edge of the refreshment table. The table held. She thought, "This is fine," and her body disagreed, and she had approximately 3 seconds of understanding what was about to happen and not being able to stop it. She went down, not forward, sideways, and then down, catching the edge of the table with her hip on the way, which was what created the sound, the knock of the table edge, the rattle of the remaining cups, and then she was on the floor, and the floor was very cold and very smooth, and she was looking sideways at the feet of a great many people. People moved. Sound picked up again. Then a voice, Celeste's voice, came from very close, low and fast. "Get up, Nara. Get up right now." But Nara's body had submitted its formal resignation from getting up, and she lay on the cold floor of the pack hall, and looked at the ceiling, which was very high and very old, and had been painted once, long ago, with something she had never been close enough to see properly. Hands reached her. Not Celeste's hands, different hands, firmer, more certain. She was being lifted, which was not something that had happened to her since she was a very small child, and her body's reaction to it was complicated, something between resistance and a surrender, so complete that she could not tell where the edges of it were. The light in the room was very bright. She was being carried, not across the room but through the doors, into the side corridor, where it was quieter, and the light was not as sharp. She was set down against the wall, sitting, and a hand stayed at her back to keep her upright, and someone said, clearly, "Get water." She knew the voice. She turned her head. Caius was crouched in front of her. His expression was different from any of the expressions she had catalogued from him over the previous 4 days. It was not the assessing expression, or the almost smile, or the careful, deliberate neutrality. It was something that did not have a formal name in the catalogue of expressions Nara had built for reading people, which was a very complete catalogue, and the fact that it was outside the catalogue meant she did not know what to do with it. "Look at me," he said. "I'm looking at you," she said. Her voice came out rougher than she intended. "What happened?" he said. "I don't know," she said, which was not entirely true. She had not eaten today, which was not unusual, and she had started the day at 4:30, which was not unusual either, and she had carried the napkins from the house to the hall at a speed that was probably faster than she should have been moving, and all of those things together had added up to the floor getting opinions. "When did you last eat?" he said. She considered lying. She considered saying this morning, which would be technically accurate if you counted the 3 bites of bread at 5 a.m. as eating. "This morning," she said. He looked at her with those dark eyes that she had decided, over the course of 4 days, were the most honest eyes she had ever encountered in anyone in authority, because they did not pretend to believe things they did not believe. "Nara," he said. "I'm fine," she said. "You're on the floor," he said. "I'm sitting on the floor," she said. "It's different." His mouth did a thing. She was fairly sure that in any other circumstance, that thing would have been a brief, involuntary smile. He held it back. The water arrived. Clara had gone for it, brisk and efficient. She handed the cup to Caius, and he held it out to Nara, not because Nara could not hold a cup, but in the particular way of someone whose hands wanted to do something useful, in a moment when the useful things were limited. She took the cup. She drank. The water was cold, and it did what water did, which was simply the correct thing. She felt her head clear slightly. The room stopped doing its tilted opinion. "I need to get back," she said. "You don't," he said. "The dinner. Clara will manage the dinner arrangements," he said. "Clara doesn't know where." "Nara." He said her name quietly, not sharply, just with enough weight that it stopped the forward movement of her next 3 sentences. "Stay here for a moment." She looked at him. "Just a moment," he said. She stayed. People passed in and out of the side corridor. The closing ceremony continued, or perhaps ended, she couldn't tell from here, and she was not, for the first time all day, thinking about what needed to happen next. Caius sat on the floor beside her, not across from her, crouched, which would have felt like supervision. Beside her, back against the wall, legs extended, which felt like something she did not have the word for. You were at the back of the hall, he said. The napkins, she said. For the refreshment table. Celeste decided they were necessary. He was quiet. How far did you walk today? He said. She thought about it. The house to the market, which was 15 minutes. The market back. The hall, which was 3 streets. About 4 miles, she said, carrying things. He said nothing. Caius, she said, and the use of his name without a title surprised her even as she said it, but he did not indicate that it was wrong, so she continued. What did you mean yesterday, about the questions you were going to ask? He turned his head and looked at her. He was very close, which was a function of both of them being against the same wall, and she was aware of it, and apparently, he was not bothered by it. I meant exactly what I said, he said. My aunt will tell you everything is fine, she said. Your aunt can tell me whatever she chooses, he said. I'm looking at the records. The records will say I'm a dependent, she said, which is accurate. I have no standing in the pack on my own. Why? He said. She looked at him. You're 22, he said. Your wolf is clearly functional. You've been running a household for 5 years. Why don't you have pack standing? Because it was never applied for, she said. Standing has to be applied for on behalf of a young wolf, by a parent, or a guardian. She paused. Celeste never applied for it. He was very still. So you're here, he said, working in a house, for 5 years, with no pack standing, which means no pack protections, no access to the shared resources, no formal status. Yes, she said. He was quiet for a moment that she felt the length of. That is not a small thing, he said. No, she said. It isn't. He looked at the corridor ahead of them. She looked at it too. People were still moving past. Nobody looked at them. The Alpha King and the household worker, sitting on the floor against the wall in the side corridor of the pack hall, were apparently too unusual a sight to process. When I leave tomorrow, he said, I will be leaving with documentation requests that the pack elder's office will be legally required to fulfill within 30 days. She said nothing. In those documents, he said, I expect to find confirmation of what you've just told me, about the standing, about the property transfer, about the inheritance. She turned to look at him. How do you know about the inheritance? Records, he said. Your father's estate was significant. It went to Celeste as next of kin, which was legal. The way it has been used since then may be a different matter. She stared at him. Why are you doing this? She said. He met her eyes. Because I notice things, he said. And when I notice something wrong, I do not look away from it. She was quiet for a long time. What will happen to me, she said, if you open all of this? He looked at her steadily. What do you want to happen? He said. She almost laughed, which surprised her, the impulse of it arriving before she could stop it. No one has asked me that in 5 years, she said. I'm asking, he said. She thought about the box under the floorboard, the small amount of money, the plan that was not yet a plan. She thought about the strip of dark sky outside her window. She thought about running in her sleep, the forest opening up, the stars knowing their own names. I want to go somewhere else, she said. I want to be somewhere, where what I am is more than what I can carry. No. He held her gaze. Yes, he said. That's what I thought. Clara came back around the corner and looked at both of them with an expression that contained several questions she had apparently decided not to ask. The ceremony is finished, she said. The family is asking for Nara. Nara started to push herself up. Caius was on his feet a moment before she was, not because she needed help, but because he apparently intended to be standing when she was standing, which was a small thing that was not small. She steadied herself. She was fine. The water had helped. She was fine. Tell them she'll be there in a few minutes, Caius said to Clara. Clara raised her eyebrows a millimeter and went back around the corner. Nara looked at him, "Thank you," she said. "For the water," he said. "For all of it," she said. He looked at her for a moment, in the particular way that she had decided was simply how he looked at things he intended to remember. "Get something to eat before the dinner," he said. "Actual food, not bread heels." She looked at him. "I know about the bread heels," he said. "I notice things." She went back around the corner. The corridor behind her was quiet. She walked back through the hall with her spine straight and her face composed, and she did not look at Celeste when Celeste saw her and did the brief, sharp assessment. She walked to the refreshment table. She picked up a full roll, still warm from the morning, and she ate it, standing at the table, in the middle of the room, while everyone was still milling around, without asking permission, and without looking down. It was the best bread she had eaten in 5 years, which made sense, because she had made it. She woke in the night because something was wrong. Not a sound, not a movement, just a feeling, the particular animal awareness that woke her sometimes when she had been sleeping badly, which was most nights, but this was sharper and more specific, like something pressing against the back of her sternum. She lay still for a moment. The strip of sky outside her window was dark. The house was quiet. The clock she could barely see read nearly 3 in the morning. She had been in bed for less than 2 hours. She sat up. Her body felt the way it had felt the afternoon before, after the pack haul, but she had eaten the roll, and then eaten properly at the departure dinner, a real meal, seated, because Caius had somehow arranged for her to be at the staff table in the back rather than serving, a transition so smooth she hadn't noticed it happening until she was already sitting down and someone was putting food in front of her. She was physically all right. The feeling was something else. She pulled on her boots and her coat over her nightclothes and went quietly into the hall. The house was dark. All the guest rooms were occupied by the delegation for one final night, before the departure in the morning. The family rooms were quiet. The kitchen was cold. She went to the kitchen. She put the kettle on, not to drink anything, just because the act of doing something warm and familiar helped with the feeling, and she stood at the window and looked out at the winter yard and thought. Caius was leaving in the morning. She had known that since before his arrival, obviously. It was the nature of a summit visit, and she had made no decision about what that meant for her, except that she had a clearer idea now of what she was going toward than she'd had before. The documentation he was requesting would not be quick. He had said 30 days. 30 days was a long time. In 30 days she could keep adding to the box under the floorboard. She could be patient. She had been patient for 5 years. But there was a different quality to it now, the patience. Before it had been patience as in simply waiting, the way something waits in the cold without knowing when warmth will come. Now it felt like patience, in the way that you were patient when you knew something specific was coming, and you were holding yourself ready for it. The kettle began to sound. She moved it off the heat. Behind her, the kitchen door opened. She turned around, expecting, reflexively, Celeste. It was Caius. He was dressed, which meant he either had not slept or had woken early, and he was looking at her with an expression that did not belong to the middle of the night, which was to say, the expression was fully awake, fully present, fully attending. "You're up early," he said. "Couldn't sleep," she said. "You?" "Same," he said. She made tea without being asked, because she was making tea anyway, and he sat at the kitchen table without being invited, because that was what he did. She set the cup down across from him and sat down herself with her own cup, and they sat across the kitchen table from each other in the dark hours before the departure day, and it was not uncomfortable. It was not comfortable in the way of familiar things either. It was something that did not have a comfortable place in the category of things she had experienced, which was, she supposed, the point. "My legal officer will begin reviewing the documents as soon as the elder's office sends them," he said. "There's a pack protection provision under the King's Law that applies to wolves who have been maintained in conditions of involuntary service without formal standing. It's not commonly invoked." "How do you know about it?" she said. "I wrote it," he said. She looked at him. 2 years ago," he said, "there was a situation in the Eastern Territory. I needed a provision that existed, and I found that it didn't, so I created it." "Were you expecting to use it?" she said. "I was expecting that it would eventually be necessary," he said. "I didn't know when." She held her cup. "Nera," he said. What I said yesterday, when I asked what you wanted. Yes, she said. That was not a theoretical question, he said. I need you to tell me something, and I need you to be honest, because what I decide to do in the next 24 hours depends on your answer. She set her cup down. All right, she said. He looked at her across the table. If you had a choice, right now, tonight, to leave this house, would you take it? The question was very direct. The directness of it did something, cleared something out of the way opening a window cleared out stale air. Yes, she said. Even without knowing where you were going, he said. Yes, she said. Even with my name attached to the reason for your leaving, which would make things complicated for a while. She thought about this. She thought about Celeste. She thought about the way the pack talked, the way any territory talked, about who was connected to who, and what that meant. She thought about being the girl that the Alpha King had involved himself with, which was an interpretation that people would use regardless of the facts. Would the complication be mine to manage, or would you be managing it, she said. I would manage it, he said. That's part of what I'm asking. She looked at him. Are you asking me to come with you? She said. I'm asking if you're willing, he said. I'm not, it's not. He paused, which was unusual, the pause itself telling her something, because she had not seen him pause before in the way of someone uncertain. I'm telling you that there is space for you, in my court, in a formal capacity, with formal standing, and formal compensation, because you are clearly capable of running almost anything, and you've been doing it here for free. She was very still. I'm also telling you, he said, that I am aware that this is coming from me, which makes it complicated in a different way, and that I do not intend to make things complicated for you, if you would rather simply have the legal matter addressed, and your own path made clear afterward. She looked at him for a long moment. You're giving me a choice, she said. Yes, he said. A real one, she said. Not one where one option is better and I'm supposed to understand that without you saying it. A real one, he said. Both are available to you. She looked at her tea. She thought about the box under the floorboard. She thought about the plan that was not yet a plan. She thought about the star in the strip of sky, and about running, and about the specific quality of the morning she had woken up on her 22nd birthday, and understood that she was going to leave, somehow, someday. She looked up. I'll come with you, she said. He held very still across the table. On the condition, she said, that I understand what the formal capacity means before we leave, and that I am not walking from one situation I don't understand into another one. Yes, he said immediately. I'll explain everything this morning, before the departure. And I need 1 hour, she said. For what? He said. To pack my things, she said. He looked at her for a moment. Yes, he said. 1 hour. She stood up. Nara, he said. She stopped. I need to tell you one thing, he said, so that you have complete information. She waited. The reason I asked you what I asked you, he said. The reason I noticed, when other people have been visiting this house for 5 years and not noticing, is that it is not only the situation that I found notable. It is you. She looked at him. He held her gaze with the honesty that was, she had decided, simply the way his eyes were built. I want you to know that, he said, because you should know that. She stood there with her coat over her nightclothes and her boots on the cold kitchen floor, and the dark outside the windows, and the kettle cooling on the shelf, and she breathed very carefully for a moment. Then she said, I'll be ready in an hour, and she went upstairs. She went to her room. She crouched beside the cot. She pulled out the loose floorboard. She took out the wooden box and held it for a moment. This small thing she had kept alive for 4 years with so much care. The money, the button, the flower, the paper with her mother's handwriting. She put it in her coat pocket. Then she began to pack. She did not have much. She had 1 bag's worth, and she filled it in, 20 minutes, and she spent the remaining 40 minutes, sitting on the edge of her cot, looking at the strip of sky outside her window, which was just beginning, very slightly, to go from black to the deep blue that came before dawn. 2 stars still visible. She learned both their names, or invented names for them, which amounted to the same thing. She was ready. The palace did not look the way Nara had imagined it. She had not spent much time imagining it. She was not by nature a person who spent energy picturing things she had not seen, because she had learned that energy spent that way was energy she could not get back. But she had had the journey, which was 3 hours by car, and in the silence of those 3 hours with the winter landscape moving past the window, some image had assembled itself in the back of her mind without permission. She had imagined something austere, stone and formality, a building that announced what it was. What she found was a house that was extremely large, which was not the same thing. It sat back from the main road behind a run of old trees that were bare now but would be substantial in summer, and it was built in the old territorial style, broad and low in the front and rising in the back where the land climbed the hill, and it had the particular look of a building that had been lived in for a very long time by people who intended to keep living in it. Clara had ridden with them from the Brentwood territory, seated in the front, and as the car turned up the long approach, Clara turned slightly in her seat and looked back at Nara. "I'll show you the guest suite first," she said. "There's food ready. Then tomorrow we'll begin the formal induction." "Formal induction," Nara said. "Your standing, your access levels, your official role," Clara said. "It sounds intimidating. It takes about 2 hours, and most of it is paperwork." Nara looked out the window at the old trees. "All right," she said. Caius, seated across from her, had said very little during the drive. This was not the silence of discomfort. It was the silence of a person who did not fill quiet space with words he did not mean, which she found she respected the same way she respected all things that were honest about their own nature. He had briefed her in the kitchen, as promised, before the departure. She now knew what the formal capacity meant. A position in the palace coordination team, managing the domestic operations of the court alongside an existing staff of 6. Real staff. People who were paid and housed and had standing. She would be one of them, with her own formal standing under the king's court, which superseded any pack-level standing, or lack thereof. She had listened to all of this carefully. She had asked 3 questions. He had answered all of them directly. She had said yes. Celeste had not known until the car was at the door. Nara had come downstairs with her bag and her coat, and had walked into the kitchen where Celeste was just arriving for her morning tea, and had said, quietly, and with no particular drama, "I'm leaving today, with the king's delegation." The look on Celeste's face was something Nara did not feel satisfied by, which surprised her. She had expected to feel something when this moment came. Instead, she had felt mostly just the factual reality of the moment, which was that she was standing in the kitchen of her father's house for the last time, and the kitchen smelled of the bread she had made that morning, the last batch she would make here, and that bread was better than any bread she had made before it, which she was almost sure was not a coincidence. Celeste had said her name sharply. Nara had said, "The documentation requests from the Alpha King's office will arrive within the week. I'd suggest you prepare for that." And then she had walked out the door. She had not looked back. Not because she was performing toughness, because there was nothing behind her she had not already carried for 5 years, and she was tired of being weighted by things she was carrying in the wrong direction. The guest suite was more room than she had lived in for 5 years combined. She sat on the edge of the bed for a few minutes after Clara left, and let herself have the moment of simply being in a room this size, with a window this large, with a view of the back garden and the hill behind it, and the last of the winter afternoon light going gold across the stone. Then she got up and looked in the bathroom, which had hot water that came from a tap, which she knew was a standard thing that most people had, but she had not had it in her room in 5 years, the house's bathroom being for the family's use. She ran the hot water. She stood at the sink with her hands under the hot water for approximately 90 seconds, which was the most self-indulgent thing she had done in recent memory, and then she dried her hands and went back to the bedroom. On the table beside the window there was a tray of food. Real food, not what was left but what had been prepared. Bread that she had not made, a bowl of soup that was still hot, a small pot of tea, a dish of preserves, a glass of water. She sat down. She ate all of it. She ate slowly, because she had time, and because the food deserved it, and she drank the tea, and looked out the window at the garden in the fading light, and the feeling in her chest was not happiness exactly, because she was not sure yet that she remembered what happiness felt like from the inside. but it was something in that direction. Something that had room to become more than what it was. The first morning at the palace, she was awake before anyone. This was not a decision. This was her body, which had been waking at 4:30 for 5 years, and was not going to stop just because the circumstances had changed. She lay in the dark for a moment, aware of the size of the room, aware of the silence, which was a different silence from the silence of the Brentwood house, warmer somehow, less compressed. She got up. She dressed. She was not sure whether she was supposed to go to the kitchen or not. She did not work here yet, formally. The induction was today. But she was awake, and the kitchen was somewhere in this building, and she needed coffee. She found it by smell. A large woman with silver hair and flour on her apron looked up when Nara appeared in the doorway and said, with the straightforward efficiency of someone who had been running a kitchen for a very long time, "You're the new one. I'm Ruth. Coffee's there." "Nara," Nara said. "Thank you." Ruth was already back to whatever she was doing, which appeared to be 3 things at once, all of them bread-related. Nara poured herself coffee. She sat on a stool at the end of the preparation counter, the end that was out of the way, and she watched Ruth work with the focused attention she gave to anything that was done well. After a few minutes, Ruth said, without turning around, "Can you do the small loaves, the ones for the breakfast baskets? The other girl is out sick." Nara set down her coffee. "Where's the starter?" she said. Ruth pointed. Nara found the starter, assessed its state, found it healthy, and began. They worked alongside each other in a silence that was entirely comfortable, the kind of silence that existed between people who understood that good work was its own conversation. Ruth did not ask her questions. Nara did not offer information. They made bread. At 6, one of the younger kitchen staff arrived and looked between Nara and Ruth, and then at the rack of perfectly shaped small loaves cooling at the end of the counter and said, "Oh, did you make those?" "Yes," Nara said. "They look good," the young man said. "They are good," Ruth said, which was the first opinion she had volunteered in an hour, and she said it with a finality that meant the matter was closed. Nara picked up her coffee. It was good to be back in a kitchen. The formal induction was at 9, in a small office off the main corridor. Clara ran it. It was, as she had promised, primarily paperwork, and most of it was the kind of paperwork that meant something real. That was the PAC standing application, her court employment contract, her housing assignment, her compensation schedule. Nara read every line. Clara watched her read every line without impatience, which Nara noted and filed under Clara's characteristics, which were efficient, honest, and apparently accustomed to dealing with people who needed to understand things fully before signing. She signed. Clara said, "You're now formally a member of the Alpha King's court staff." In the same voice she might have said "the sky is gray," which was exactly the right tone, neither dramatic nor dismissive. "Thank you," Nara said. "Your direct supervisor is Ruth for kitchen matters, and me for everything else," Clara said. "The other court staff will introduce themselves as you meet them. Caius." She paused briefly on the name. "The Alpha King would like to meet with you at 4 this afternoon, to review your first week's schedule." "At 4, Nara said. "His office," Clara said. "Third door on the right, in the upper corridor. Knock." Nara nodded. She left the induction office and stood for a moment in the main corridor of the palace. Around her, the building moved, staff walking with purpose, a pair of what appeared to be council advisors in conversation, near the wide staircase. Through the large windows at the front, the winter garden, bare-branched and precise. She was here. She was actually here. She had a role and a salary and a standing and a room that was more space than she had lived in for 5 years, and she had signed her own name on paperwork that said all of this was hers, by right of her own capacity, not by someone else's tolerance. She breathed. The feeling in her chest was still not quite happiness, but it was larger than it had been yesterday. It was growing in the direction of something real. She went to find Ruth, because there was a lunch to prepare, and she now had the formal right to help prepare it. That was enough for now. That was, in fact, a great deal. The meeting at 4 was not what she expected. She had expected a formal briefing, a list of responsibilities, the particular careful distance that people in authority maintained when they wanted to be fair, without being familiar. What she found was Kaya standing at the window of his office looking out at the garden, and turning when she knocked and said, "You wanted to see me," with the expression that was not quite the almost smile, but was adjacent to it. "How was your first morning?" he said. "I made bread," she said. "Ruth's already told me," he said. "She doesn't usually tell me things. That means she thought it was worth mentioning." Nara sat in the chair across from his desk that he indicated. "Nara," he said, "I want to make sure something is clear." "All right," she said. "What I told you this morning," he said, "about the role, the standing, the formal capacity, all of that is real and permanent and has nothing to do with anything else." She looked at him. "I'm not saying it as a contract," he said. "I'm saying it because I want you to understand that your situation here is not conditional." "Not conditional on what?" she said. He looked at her steadily. "On anything," he said. She understood what he was saying. She understood it completely, because she was a person who had spent 5 years reading rooms and reading people and reading the space between what was said and what was meant. He was telling her that he was not trading one thing for another. He was telling her that she had not exchanged one version of obligation for a different one. She sat with this for a moment. "Thank you," she said, "for saying it directly." "I say most things directly," he said. "I've noticed," she said. That almost smile appeared, and this time it completed itself, and she saw it, the actual smile, and it was a different thing entirely from almost. She looked away for a moment, at the window, at the garden, at the winter trees. "My mother used to say," she said, "that the best thing you could have in a person was someone who meant what they said and said what they meant." "She sounds like someone worth listening to," he said. "She was," Nara said. He was quiet for a moment. "Tell me about her," he said. And that was the other thing about him, the thing she was only beginning to understand, that he asked the questions that no one had asked her, not because they were strategic, but because he was genuinely interested in the answers. She told him. Not everything, not all at once, but something, a real something, and he listened, and the office got darker as the afternoon light left the window, and neither of them moved to turn on the lamps for a while. Outside, the winter garden held its bare branches up against the early dark. Inside, something was beginning. Small and real, and growing in the direction of the light. Like bread, like a jar of starter kept alive on purpose, on a cold shelf, by someone who had not given up. Like that. She learned the shape of the palace by walking it. Every morning before anyone was up, she took a different route from her room to the kitchen, moving through corridors that were lit only by the low emergency lighting, her hands not touching the walls because she was practicing the skill of not needing to. In the Brentwood house, she had walked close to walls. She was working on something different here. It took 2 weeks before she had the full layout. The palace was larger than it appeared from the outside because it grew backward into the hill, a series of extensions added over generations, until the building was more complex than any single architectural plan could capture. There were rooms she did not have access to yet, council chambers and personal quarters, and what Clara described as the document rooms, which contained the pack records going back 3 centuries. There were rooms she did have access to that were so large, she still found herself surprised by them when she entered: the main hall, the kitchen garden, the long corridor that faced the eastern hill and caught the first light of the morning when the sun cleared the ridge. She found that corridor on the 9th day. She stood in it in the early morning, with the light coming through the windows and her cup of coffee, and no one else around, and she let herself stand there for a long moment, doing nothing at all. In the Brentwood house, standing still had meant either you were between tasks or you had missed something. The stillness had always had a texture of risk to it, the risk of being seen and found idle, and assigned the next thing. Here, the stillness was just stillness. It took some getting used to. Ruth had decided, apparently, that Nara was her new sous chef, a decision that Ruth had made without discussing it with anyone, which was how Ruth made most decisions. This meant that Nara's mornings were spent in the kitchen, working alongside Ruth and the 2 junior kitchen staff, preparing the palace's daily meals. This was not her formal role. Her formal role, as outlined in the induction paperwork, was in domestic operations management, which meant the running of the household systems, linen, maintenance scheduling, Supplier coordination, the movement of things between where they were and where they needed to be. But Ruth had decided that Nara belonged in the kitchen in the mornings, and since Ruth's breakfast bread was one of the things the palace ran on, no one argued with Ruth about most things. Nara did not argue with it either. The kitchen was where she was most comfortable, and being comfortable had become something she was allowing herself. One morning, 3 weeks after her arrival, Ruth said without looking up from her work, "You were in a bad house before this." It was not a question. Nara was shaping roles. She kept shaping them. "Yes," she said. "How long?" 5 years. Ruth made a sound that was not quite a word. She had a repertoire of these sounds, each with a specific meaning. This one meant something like, "I thought so and it's over now." They kept working. "My first kitchen," Ruth said after a while. "I was 12, working for a family outside the territory. Terrible family." She moved a tray. "I was there for 3 years before someone hired me properly, paid me properly." Nara looked at her. Ruth shrugged. "You come out of it," she said. "You just have to let yourself." She went back to her work. Nara went back to hers. She thought about this for the rest of the morning. The phrase, "let yourself," the particular challenge of a thing that was entirely internal, that required no external permission, only the internal one, which was sometimes the harder one to grant. The court had opinions about her. She had expected this. A new person, in a new role, arrived under circumstances that the court members were curious about, but had not been formally briefed on. The Alpha King had brought someone back from a territory visit. The someone had been installed in a formal role. The someone was young and female, and not from a notable pack family. There were interpretations. She heard them, not because anyone said them to her face, but because she had spent 5 years becoming very good at hearing things that were not said to her face. She heard them in the slight pauses when she entered a room, in the way a council advisor named Henry Marsh looked at her sometimes with a very particular quality of assessment. Henry Marsh was 62, had been in the court for 25 years, and had the settled certainty of a person who had been right about most things for long enough that he had stopped examining whether he was still right about anything. He came to the kitchen one morning, which was unusual enough that Ruth looked up with an expression of mild suspicion. "I'm looking for the domestic operations manager," he said. "That's me," Nara said. He looked at her. He took in the apron, the flour on her hands, the kitchen. "I see," he said, in a tone that meant he was adding information to a picture he had already formed. "What can I help you with?" she said. "I've been reviewing the supplier contracts," he said. "There are some questions about the new schedule your office issued." "Which questions?" she said. He outlined them. They were good questions, actually, the kind that indicated he had read the schedule carefully. She answered each one, specifically and completely, without defensive explanation or unnecessary hedging. He was quiet for a moment after she finished. "The third contract," he said, "the delivery timing change. The previous timing conflicted with the kitchen's preparation schedule for formal dinners," she said. "Shifting it forward by 2 hours means Ruth has the ingredients she needs before the morning prep begins, rather than halfway through it." Ruth, at the other end of the kitchen, made a sound that meant exactly. Henry Marsh looked at Ruth. He looked back at Nara. "That's sensible," he said. "Thank you," she said. He left. Ruth waited until the door closed, and then said, "He'll be less difficult after today." Nara went back to her bread. She noted the fact that she had not once during that exchange spoken at less than her full speed, or reduced the precision of what she was saying, or looked down. She had looked at him directly the whole time. She was not entirely sure when she had started doing that. She thought it might have started the morning she left the Brentwood house, the morning she had said her piece to Celeste, and walked out the door, and not looked back. Or it might have started earlier, in a storage room, with a first aid kit on the floor. She kept shaping bread. At 4 on a Thursday, 6 weeks after her arrival, Clara knocked on the door of the small office that Nara had been assigned for the domestic operations role. "The legal officer's report is in," Clara said. Nara looked up. She had been expecting it. She had been expecting it for 6 weeks, knowing it was coming, not thinking about it excessively, the way she did not think excessively about things she could not yet act on. But she felt the weight of it now, the arrival of what it meant. "I'll read it with you if you want," Clara said. "Please," Nara said. They read it together. Clara sitting across the desk, Nara on her side. The report was thorough. The legal officer had found the property transfer documents, the estate records, the accounting of her father's assets. She had found the omission of the PAC standing application. She had found the omission of the PAC standing application. She had found the omission of Kauffer sold labor. She had found the jewelry, or at least the records of it, the list of items that had been catalogued at the time of the death, and that should have been held in trust until Nara's majority, and were not. She had found all of it. Nara read through the last page and set the report down. Clara was watching her. "What happens now?" Nara said. "It goes to the king," Clara said. "He reviews it. Then a formal notice is issued to Elder Groves's office, and to Celeste Brent, requiring a legal response within 30 days. "Can they argue against it?" Nara said. "They can try," Clara said. "The omission of the standing application is not arguable. That's a clear violation of PAC law. The property matters are more complex, but the estate records are clear." She paused. "Nara, the short version is that this is very much in your favor." Nara looked at the report. "Does it feel the way you thought it would?" Clara said. Nara thought about this. "No," she said. "I thought it would feel like something being returned to me. But it feels more like," she paused, "like a door opening, not backward into what was. Forward, into what should have been possible." Clara nodded. "That's a good way to think about it," she said. Nara picked up the report. "I'll take it to him," she said. "He's in the East Corridor," Clara said. "He goes there at 4 on Thursdays." Nara had not known that. She considered whether Clara had just told her something deliberate, and concluded that Clara did nothing without deliberate intent. "Thank you," she said, and went. The East Corridor was the one she had found on the 9th day, the one with the morning light. She had not known it was somewhere he went. He was standing at the far end, looking out at the hill, when she came in. He heard her footsteps on the stone floor and turned. She held up the report. "Legal officer's findings," she said. He came down the corridor toward her. He took the report. He looked at it for a moment, then at her. "How are you?" he said. "I'm all right," she said. "It's a lot to have written down." "Yes," he said. 5 years, she said. "It looks different in a document than it does in your head." He was quiet for a moment. "It looks like what it was," he said. "Yes," she said. "Exactly that." They stood in the East Corridor, in the Thursday afternoon light, which was not the morning light, but was its own thing, longer and lower, coming through the windows at an angle that made the stone floor look warm. "I wanted to ask you something," she said. He waited. "The day you found me in the storage room," she said, "with my hand." "Yes," he said. "You asked if that was the only one," she said, "meaning the injury." "Yes," he said. "But you knew it wasn't," she said. "You already knew." He held her gaze. "Yes," he said. "At the closing ceremony," she said, "when I fell." "Yes," he said. "I saw." She had known. She had understood, in the weeks since her arrival, that that was the moment that things changed, that what he had seen in that moment had been part of what moved him to act when he acted. But she had not asked him about it directly until now. "It didn't change anything?" she said. "The way people look at someone when they see something like that." "What do you mean?" he said. "It usually changes things," she said. "It usually changes how people see you, not always in the right direction." He looked at her for a long moment. "It changed things," he said. "It made me certain of what I had already decided." She breathed. Outside the windows, the hill was gold in the late afternoon. "I'm glad you noticed," she said. "I know," he said. They stood there for a while, in the corridor with the winter light, with the report in his hands and the palace quiet around them, and the 6 weeks between them that were not nothing, that were, in fact, the beginning of something specific and real. She did not know yet what to call it. She did not need to call it anything yet. She just knew that when she left this corridor and went back to her office and her work and her life in this place that was becoming hers, she was going to carry the feeling of this moment with her, the way she had carried the small wooden box, carefully and on purpose, as something belonging entirely to herself. She turned to go. "Nara," he said. She stopped. "Thank you," he said, "for reading it, for bringing it to me." She looked back at him. "Thank you," she said, "for looking." She meant more than the report. He knew that. She left the corridor. Behind her, the light held. Nara had a dream she had not had in years. She was in the kitchen of her father's house, but not the way the kitchen had been in the Brentwood years, cold and demanding, and lit with the specific gray of 5 o'clock in January. In the dream, the kitchen was the way it had been when she was 9 years old, and her father was at the table, and her mother was doing something at the stove that smelled like the cardamom cake she made on Sundays, and everything in the room was the same shade of gold. She woke up and lay still. The feeling of the dream stayed for a few seconds, which was longer than it usually stayed. Then it thinned and went, and she was in her room in the palace, with the large window, and the good mattress, and the strip of sky, that was not narrow like her old window, but wide, and full, and already beginning to pale at the edges with the approach of dawn. She did not get up immediately. She lay there and thought about her mother's cardamom cake. She had the recipe. It was the piece of paper in the wooden box, the one she had kept for 5 years under the floorboard, and the box was on the shelf in this room now, on the shelf beside the window where she could see it. She had not made the cake. There had been no occasion for it, or perhaps she had not felt ready for it, or perhaps making it would require accepting that the kitchen she made it in would be this kitchen, and not the one from the dream. She got up. She dressed. She went downstairs. The kitchen was empty except for Ruth, who arrived even earlier than Nara, which was something Nara had discovered in the first week and found quietly impressive. Ruth looked up when she came in. "Sleep well?" Ruth said. "Better than usual," Nara said. Ruth nodded. She went back to her work. The kettle was already on. Nara poured her coffee. "Ruth," she said. Ruth said. "Do you have cardamom?" Ruth looked at her over her shoulder. "What are you making?" "Cake," Nara said. Ruth pointed to the spice shelf. Nara found the cardamom. She stood at the preparation counter with the small jar in her hand and the wooden box's recipe in her memory, every step of it, and she began. The cake was done by 7. She ate a slice at the kitchen table while it was still warm, which was the correct way to eat it. Her mother had been very clear on this point, and the taste of it was the kind of thing that did something inside her chest that was too complex to name and too important to not let happen, so she let it happen. Ruth came and stood beside her and looked at the cake. "That smells good," Ruth said. Nara cut her a slice. Ruth ate it standing up, which was how Ruth ate everything. She said nothing for a moment. "That's very good," she said. "It's my mother's recipe," Nara said. Ruth was quiet for a moment. "She taught you well," she said. "She taught me everything she had time to teach me," Nara said. "And then I taught myself the rest." Ruth made the sound that meant "I thought so, and you turned out fine, and nothing more needs to be said on the subject," all in one. She went back to her work. Nara sat at the table with her coffee and the remnant of the cake. She had been at the palace for almost 3 months. 3 months was not a long time. It was, however, long enough to have established the rhythm of a life, which was something she had not had for 5 years. A rhythm was different from a routine. A routine you followed because you had to. A rhythm you carried with you because it was yours. The news about Celeste arrived on a Tuesday. It arrived in the form of a formal notification from the legal officer, copied to Nara's office and to Caius, which stated that Celeste Brent had accepted the terms of the settlement, which included the return of the assessed value of Nara's inheritance, the PAC standing that had been withheld, and a formal acknowledgement of the violation, which would be entered into the PAC records. She was not going to prison. Nara had not wanted that, and had said so to the legal officer when it had been a possible outcome. She had wanted the acknowledgement and the return, and she had wanted Celeste to have to put her name on a piece of paper that said clearly what she had done. That was the part that mattered. She read the notification twice. Then she set it on her desk and sat for a moment. She had thought this would feel like a door closing. That was how she had imagined it, the resolution as a kind of conclusion, a thing finished. It felt less like a door and more like a window being cleaned. The same world on the other side of the glass, but clearer. The view of it improved. She thought of her father. She thought of her mother. She thought of the ring on Petra's hand that was now legally Nara's again, though she would not take it back. She had thought about this. The ring, the jewelry, the other things. She did not want them back in the way of possession. She wanted the record to show that they had been hers. It did. That was enough. Caius found her in the east corridor that evening. She had been there often enough by now that it had become, unofficially, the place she went when she needed to think in the particular way that required looking at something that did not need anything from her. The hill outside the east windows was good for that. It sat there and had opinions about nothing. He came in from the far end, and she turned. "You saw the notification," she said. "Yes," he said. She looked at the hill. "How do you feel?" he said. "I keep asking myself that," she said. "I'm not sure I have a clean answer." "You don't have to have one," he said. "I know," she said. "That's what's strange. I know I don't have to. I'm still trying to work out what I actually feel, versus what I think I should feel, versus what I would have felt 5 years ago." He stood beside her, not across from her, looking at the same hill. "What would you have felt 5 years ago?" he said. "Rage," she said. "And then relief. And then grief. In that order. And now?" She thought about it. "Clarity," she said. "Like something that was always slightly blurred has gone into focus." She paused. "And something else. Something I don't have the word for. Related to my parents." She stopped. He waited. "They deserved better," she said, "than what happened to what they built. And now the record says so. Officially." He was quiet for a long moment. "Yes," he said. "It does." They stood at the east windows in the evening. "Nara," he said. She turned to look at him. He was looking at her with the expression that was outside her catalog, the one she had first seen in the side corridor of the pack hall when she was on the floor, and he was crouching in front of her. The one she had seen versions of since, in the east corridor on a Thursday afternoon, in the kitchen doorway at midnight, in the moments that had accumulated between them over 3 months like a slow and steady tide. "I need to tell you something," he said. "All right," she said. He looked at the hill for a moment, then back at her. "I have been in this position for 3 years," he said. "I have been careful about most things during that time. Careful about what I decide, and how I decide it. I have tried to be clear with myself about what is appropriate and what is not appropriate given what I am and what I do." She said nothing. "What I feel for you," he said, "is not something I decided. It is not something that arrived slowly and could have been stopped early with better management. It arrived complete and has not changed since it arrived." She was very still. "I want to be transparent with you about it," he said, "because you have had enough in your life of people who were not transparent with you. And I want you to know that it changes nothing about your situation here. The formal capacity, the standing, the role, all of that is yours." "I know," she said. "You told me." "I know I told you," he said. "I'm telling you again." She looked at him. "What are you asking?" she said. He held her gaze. "I'm not asking," he said. "I'm telling you what is. What you do with it is entirely yours." She looked at him for a long time. She thought about the morning in the Brentwood kitchen, when she had decided she was going to go. The decision that had been her own, in a life where very little was her own. She thought about how that decision had led here, through a storage room and a pack hall floor, and a 3-hour car ride and a corridor of morning light, to this moment. She thought about what it felt like to be in a room with someone who asked what she wanted, and meant the question, and did not take the answer for granted. She thought about the cardamom cake. "I know what I feel," she said. "I've known for a while. I wasn't sure what to do with it." He was very still. "What stopped you?" he said. She thought about this honestly. "Learning to trust that good things don't have conditions," she said. "That they don't turn into something else when you're not looking." He nodded. This was a thing he understood. "They don't," he said. "Not all of them." "No," she said. "Not all of them." She looked at the hill. "I'm not going to be someone who waits for the other shoe to drop," she said, half to herself. "I decided that this morning, actually, when I made the cake." He looked at her with curiosity. "My mother's recipe," she said. "I've been avoiding making it, waiting for the right occasion. This morning I made it anyway." "How was it?" he said. "Perfect," she said. "It was perfect because I made it, not because the occasion was right." He was quiet. Then he said, "I would like to try it sometime." She looked at him. "Tomorrow," she said. "I'll make another one." Something in his face was very quiet and very certain. Yes, he said. They stood at the east windows as the last of the light left the hill, and the world outside went from gold to gray to the deep blue of early night, and neither of them moved for a while, because neither of them needed to. The hill outside had opinions about nothing. Inside, something had been named. Something that had been building for 3 months, in corridors and kitchens and late evenings and early mornings, in the specific accumulation of 2 people being genuinely honest with each other, had finally found its shape. She did not know yet what it would become. She knew it was real. That was enough to start. That was, she had learned, always enough to start. Nara did not know her aunt was coming until Celeste was at the palace gate. Clara told her, not urgently, not with drama. In the matter-of-fact way Clara delivered all information, including information that had the potential to be significant. She knocked on the door of Nara's office and said, "Celeste Brent is at the front gate. She arrived 20 minutes ago. She's saying she has a right to a conversation with you." Nara set down the supplier document she had been reviewing. "Does she have a legal right to be here?" she said. "No," Clara said. "She has no standing on King's Court grounds. She would need an invitation." "Has she been told that?" "The gate staff told her," Clara said. "She is still at the gate." Nara thought about this for a moment. In the week since the settlement notification, she had not seen Celeste, had not spoken to her, had not thought about her except in the specific practical way that you thought about the settled parts of things. Celeste's name was on a document in the legal record. That was the version of Celeste that existed for Nara now. The rest of her, the living woman at the gate, had been a known quantity for 5 years and held no surprises. And yet, "I'll see her," Nara said. Clara looked at her. "Not inside," Nara said. "At the gate. For 10 minutes. "Do you want someone with you?" Clara said. "No," Nara said. She put on her coat. She walked through the palace and out through the front, which she rarely used, and down the long approach between the old trees. The gate was iron, tall, old. Beyond it, on the road, Celeste was standing in a dark wool coat, her hair pinned up the way she wore it, for occasions she considered important. She was not accompanied, which was interesting. In the Brentwood territory, Celeste never went anywhere without a framing of one kind or another, a daughter, an elder, a social context. She had come here alone. The gate staff stood at a discreet distance. Nara stopped on her side of the gate and looked at Celeste. For a moment neither of them spoke. Celeste looked older than Nara remembered. This was not a meaningful observation, since she had not seen her in 5 months, but she noted it anyway. She looked older, and she looked, underneath the familiar composed expression, like a person who had recently been asked to look clearly at something she would rather not have seen. "Nara," Celeste said. "Celeste," Nara said. A pause. "I came to—" Celeste stopped. She started again. "The legal matter is settled." "Yes," Nara said. "I received the notification. I wanted to tell you." Celeste stopped again. She looked at her hands. She looked back at Nara. "I did not intend for it to become what it became." Nara looked at her steadily. "What did you intend?" she said. Celeste was quiet for a moment. "I intended to give you a home," she said. "After your parents." She paused. "I intended for it to work differently." "How differently?" Nara said. Not coldly. Just asking. "I don't know," Celeste said, and she said it with the particular flatness of someone saying something true that they find difficult. "I told myself certain things, for a while. That you were too young to understand the property, that the work was good for you, that you were being given stability." She paused. "I stopped telling myself those things eventually. I simply stopped thinking about it." Nara said nothing. "I am not asking for—" Celeste stopped. "I don't know what I came here for, actually. I thought I did. I thought I would come and say the right thing, and it would mean something. But I'm standing here, and I realize I don't have the right thing." The wind moved between them, through the iron of the gate. "No," Nara said. "You don't." Celeste looked at her. "But you can say what you have," Nara said. "I'm listening." Celeste was quiet for a long moment. "You were the best thing in that house," she said finally. "The way it ran. The way it always ran, no matter what I asked of it. No matter what I asked of you." She paused. and I took all of it as my own. I sat at your father's table, and I took everything that should have been yours, and I called it management, and I called it stability, and I told myself I was providing. She stopped. Nara breathed. Thank you, Nara said, for saying it directly. Celeste looked at her with something complicated in her face. Your mother would be, she began. Yes, Nara said, she would be. She did not want to hear the end of that sentence from Celeste's mouth. Not because it would be untrue, because some things belonged to her alone, and her mother's pride was one of them, and she was not going to share it through a gate with a woman who had turned her father's kitchen into her own. I have to get back to work, Nara said. Celeste nodded. Good, she said. Good. Nara turned and walked back up the approach. She did not feel triumph. She did not feel relief. She felt something quieter and more lasting, the feeling of a thing having been looked at directly, and having turned out to be manageable after all. She went inside. She went back to her office. She picked up the supplier document. She finished reading it. She told Caius about the visit that evening. Not in the East Corridor, not at a formal meeting, but in the palace kitchen, where she sometimes ended her evenings, and where he had taken to appearing when Clara told him Nara was there, which was something she had recently realized Clara did deliberately, and which she had decided she did not mind. He listened to the whole account without interrupting. When she finished, he said, How do you feel? Like it's actually finished, she said. Not officially. Officially it was finished when the settlement was signed, but actually. He nodded. She was rolling out pastry for the next day's breakfast, which was something she did sometimes in the evenings when her hands needed work. He was sitting on the stool at the end of the preparation counter, where she had sat on her first morning with her coffee, watching Ruth. Caius, she said. Yes, he said. Can I ask you something I haven't asked before? Yes, he said. She looked at the pastry. She kept rolling it. The night we sat in the kitchen, she said. Before I left Brentwood, you said that the reason you noticed was not only the situation. Yes, he said. What did you mean, specifically? She said. Not what the situation was. What you meant about me. He was quiet for a moment. I meant, he said, that there are people who go through very difficult circumstances and become less of themselves. They get worn down, and what is left is the wearing, not the person. She kept her hands on the pastry. And some people, he said, do not become less. They become more exact, more themselves, as if the difficulty clarified rather than diminished. He paused. You are the second kind. She lifted her eyes to look at him. You were running on nothing, he said, working hours that no one should be asked to work, in a house where your presence was taken, and your existence was minimized, and nothing you did was acknowledged, and you were still. He stopped. Still what? She said. Still entirely yourself, he said. The way you moved, the way you answered me in the kitchen the first morning, the way you said the word everything, when I asked if you were the cook. It was not what I expected. From someone in your situation. She looked at him. I didn't know I was doing anything except surviving, she said. I know, he said. That's what made it remarkable. She held his gaze for a moment. You're going to make me burn the pastry, she said. He looked at the pastry. It looks fine, he said. It's fine because I'm paying attention, she said. Stop making it difficult to pay attention. The not-quite smile appeared. She had gotten better at knowing when it was coming. There was a slight shift in his eyes first, a micro-adjustment, and then the territory around his mouth changed. I'll stop, he said. He did not stop, but she managed the pastry anyway. The ceremony happened in the spring. It was not, formally, a ceremony. Caius had told her that he wanted to do something official regarding her standing, something that made the record clear, that went beyond the domestic operations contract and the legal settlement, something that named what the situation actually was. He had told her this in the East Corridor, in the morning, with the early light coming through the windows. She had said, What do you mean by official? He had said, I mean I want the court and the pack to understand your position formally, not as staff. She had looked at him. You need to say what you mean, she said, directly. He had looked at her with those eyes that did not pretend to believe things they did not believe. I mean, he said, that I want you beside me. Formally, officially, in the permanent way. She had stood very still. Is that, she began. It's what I want, he said. It's completely your decision. She had thought about the cardamom cake. She had thought about the morning she had made it, without waiting for the occasion to be right. Yes, she said. It was not a complicated ceremony. The court was gathered in the main hall, the same hall where she had eaten breakfast at the staff table on her second morning. The same hall where Henry Marsh had stopped finding her difficult by the end of her 4th week. The same hall where Ruth had, on one occasion, told a council advisor that the bread was not ready yet, and would not be ready until it was ready. And Caius had not countermanded her, and the advisor had waited. The record was entered. The standing was formalized. It was stated clearly and officially, in the language that meant permanent, that the position was chosen by both people, and could not be changed by anyone outside of them. She stood beside Caius. She wore the coat that Clara had helped her find, dark blue, good wool, the kind of coat that was made to last. She did not look down. She had stopped doing that. Afterward, when the formal part was done, and the court had dispersed, and the hall was quiet, they stood by the wide windows that faced the front approach, and the old trees, which were in leaf now, which changed the quality of the light coming through the glass. Nara, he said. Yes, she said. How do you feel? He said. She thought about it with the full honesty she gave to his questions, because they had established between them that honesty was the thing they were doing, and it was the thing they intended to keep doing, and she was not going to shortchange it now. Like the morning after I made the cake, she said. When I realized I was going to be all right, not fine, all right, which is bigger. He looked at her. I feel like I made the cake, she said, and it was perfect, not because the occasion was right. She paused. Because I made it. He was very still beside her. Yes, he said, exactly that. She looked at the old trees through the window. She thought about her father, who had known the names of all the stars. She thought about her mother, whose hands had been shaped like her own. She thought about a strip of sky through a narrow window in a cold room, and about a star she had named herself in the last seconds before sleep, and about running in her sleep through a forest, where the dark was full of silver, and the trees opened up like they were glad she was coming. She was glad she was here. That was the thing she had not said, and did not need to say out loud, because it was in her face, and in the way she stood, and in the fact that she was not looking down, and not walking close to the walls. She was glad she was here. Here, in this building, in this life, beside this man who had noticed her in a kitchen, and crouched in a storage room, and asked what she wanted, and meant the question every time. Here, carrying everything she had always carried, her father's button, her mother's recipe, the small wooden box, the years, the scars, the bread knowledge, the jar of something alive, kept on purpose. Here, finally, with enough room to carry it all, without it being the only thing. The trees outside were full of new leaves. The morning would come again tomorrow, as it always did, and she would wake with the particular readiness that was hers alone, and she would go to the kitchen before anyone else was up, and she would start the bread. And it would be good, because she made it, because she was good at it, because she was still entirely herself, running, and arrived.